Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Valiant, staring at the strange alien vessel floating in the darkness of space. The ship looked like nothing he had ever seen before. Its hull was smooth and curved, made of some kind of biometal that seemed to pulse with a faint blue light. But that light was getting weaker by the hour, and Jake knew the ship was dying. 3 days ago, the alien vessel had appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. It had come out of nowhere, moving slowly and broadcasting a message on all frequencies. The message was in broken English, spoken by a voice that sounded desperate and afraid. The words were simple but terrifying. "Please help us. We are dying. The Devourers have come." Jake had been ordered to intercept the ship and make first contact. His crew was nervous but excited. This was humanity's first meeting with an alien species, and everyone wanted to make a good impression. But when the alien ambassador came aboard the Valiant, Jake realized this was not going to be a happy occasion. The alien called herself Ambassador Kethva, and she was unlike anything Jake had imagined. She stood about 6 feet tall with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes were large and silver, and they held a sadness that made Jake's chest tighten. She wore simple robes that looked elegant but practical, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of terrible loss. "We are the Zephyrians," she said, her English careful but clear. "We have traveled very far to find you. Our people are dying, and we have nowhere else to turn." Captain Lisa Morgan, head of the First Contact Division, had flown out from Earth to handle the negotiations. She was a tough woman who had spent years preparing for this moment, but even she seemed shaken by what Kethva told them. The Zephyrians had once been a great civilization, spanning 12 worlds and numbering in the billions. Their technology was advanced beyond human understanding. They had energy shields that could stop any weapon, ships that could travel faster than light, and tools that could reshape matter itself, but none of that had saved them from the Devourers. "They came from the darkness between stars," Kethva explained, her voice breaking slightly. "We had heard rumors of them," Stories told, by refugees from distant worlds, but we thought we were safe. We thought our defenses were strong enough. Dr. Alex Turner, the xenobiologist assigned to the mission, leaned forward in his chair. He had been studying the Zephyrians since they arrived, and what he had learned worried him. "Tell us about your world," he said gently. "What was it like before the Devourers came?" Kethva's eyes grew distant, as if she was remembering something beautiful that had been lost forever. "Our world was perfect," she said. "The climate was always pleasant, never too hot or too cold. Food grew easily, and we never knew hunger. There were no predators, no diseases, no wars. We lived in harmony with nature and with each other." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He was starting to understand why the Zephyrians had been so helpless against the Devourers. They had never learned to fight because they had never needed to. They were like sheep being slaughtered by wolves, and they didn't even know how to bare their teeth. "What exactly are the Devourers?" Captain Morgan asked. "What do they want?" Kethva shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "They are hunger given form," she whispered. "They consume everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire civilizations. They take the matter and energy and use it to grow stronger, to build more ships, to create more of themselves. They feel no mercy, show no compassion. They exist only to devour." Dr. Turner had been taking notes, but now he looked up with a frown. "How did they defeat your technology? You said you had advanced weapons and shields." "We did," Kethva said sadly. "But we never learned to use them properly. When the Devourers came, we tried to negotiate with them. We offered them resources, territory, anything they wanted. But they wanted everything. They wanted us." She paused, her silver eyes filling with tears. "Some of our people tried to fight back, but we didn't know how. We had never faced an enemy that showed no mercy. We had never learned to be cruel, to be ruthless, and in the end, that gentleness was our weakness." Jake exchanged glances with Captain Morgan. They were both thinking the same thing. Humanity had never had the luxury of being gentle. Earth was a harsh world that had forged its children in fire and blood. Humans had learned to fight because they had to, or they would die. How many of your people are left? Jake asked quietly. Kethva's voice was barely a whisper. Perhaps a few thousand scattered across the galaxy in hidden ships like this one. We are all that remains of 12 worlds and billions of lives. The bridge fell silent. Everyone was thinking about the magnitude of the loss. An entire civilization wiped out by an enemy that existed only to consume. It was a nightmare beyond imagination. Why did you come to us? Captain Morgan asked. How did you even know we existed? Kethva straightened slightly, and for the first time, Jake saw a spark of hope in her eyes. We heard stories, she said. Refugees from other worlds spoke of a species that lived on a death world, a place so harsh that it forged its children into warriors. They said these beings had never known peace, that they had fought their way to the stars through blood and determination. She looked directly at Jake, and he felt the weight of her expectations. They said that if anyone could stand against the Devourers, it would be the humans. They said you were the only species in the galaxy that truly understood what it meant to fight for survival. Jake felt his chest tighten. The Zephyrians had come to Earth because they had heard that humans were tough, that they were fighters, but they had no idea what they were really asking for. They wanted humanity to go to war against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than Earth. They wanted Deathworlders to do what Paradise Dwellers could not. We will help you, Captain Morgan said firmly. But you need to understand something. We are not like your people. We are not gentle or kind. We are survivors, and we will do whatever it takes to win. Kethva nodded eagerly. We understand. We know that humans are different. That is why we came to you. But Jake wondered if she really understood. The Zephyrians had lived in paradise for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be predators. They were about to learn that when you ask Deathworlders for help, you get exactly what you asked for. And sometimes that is more terrible than the enemy you were trying to defeat. General Robert Hayes walked through the underground corridors of NORAD, his boots echoing off the concrete walls. The mountain facility had been built during the Cold War to withstand nuclear attack, but now it was serving a different purpose. Deep beneath the Colorado mountains, Earth's military leaders were preparing for humanity's first interstellar war. The briefing room was packed with officers from every branch of the military. Admiral Kate Sullivan from Space Command sat next to Marine Colonel Danny Rodriguez, while Air Force General Linda Thompson reviewed tactical data on her tablet. These were the people who would decide how humanity would respond to the Zephyrian. Plea for help. Hayes took his place at the head of the table and activated the holographic display. The image that appeared made everyone in the room fall silent. It showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with red markers indicating Devourer-controlled systems. There were hundreds of them, spreading outward like a cancer through space. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes began, his voice grim, we are facing an enemy unlike anything we have ever encountered. The Devourers are not just conquerors. They are a plague that consumes everything in their path. Dr. Helen Carter, the military's chief xenobiologist, stood up and pointed to the display. She had spent weeks studying the data provided by the Zephyrians, and what she had learned kept her awake at night. The Devourers are not a natural species, she explained. They appear to be bioengineered organisms designed for one purpose: consumption and reproduction. She pressed a button, and the display changed to show a close-up image of a Devourer ship. It looked like a massive insect crossed with a machine, its hull covered in what looked like chitinous armor. Strange tentacles writhed from its surface, and pulsing veins of light ran along its length. These ships are grown, not built, Carter continued. They use organic matter as both fuel and construction material. When they consume a planet, they literally digest it and use the resources to create more ships and more Devourers. Colonel Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the image with professional interest. He had fought in conflicts across Earth, from the jungles of South America to the deserts of the Middle East, but this was something entirely different. What about their ground forces? he asked. Carter switched to another image, and several officers gasped. The Devourer warrior was a nightmare of flesh and metal, standing nearly 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in natural armor, and its arms ended in claws that could cut through steel. Multiple eyes dotted its head, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. "They feel no pain," Carter said quietly. "They show no mercy. They have no concept of surrender or negotiation. They exist only to feed and reproduce. And they are incredibly difficult to kill." Captain Steve Walker, Earth's most experienced starship commander, had been studying the tactical data for days. He was a veteran of the Outer Colony Wars, a man who had seen combat in the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter. But even he looked troubled by what he was seeing. "Their tactics are simple but effective," Walker explained. "They attack in massive swarms, overwhelming their targets through sheer numbers. They have no regard for their own casualties. If they lose 1,000 ships to destroy one enemy vessel, they consider it a victory." Admiral Sullivan nodded grimly. "The Zephyrians tried to fight them with conventional tactics. They formed battle lines, used coordinated strikes, tried to minimize their losses. It was exactly the wrong approach." Hayes studied the faces around the table. These were tough men and women, hardened by years of military service. But he could see the concern in their eyes. The Devourers were unlike any enemy humanity had ever faced. They were not motivated by politics or resources or ideology. They were driven by pure hunger, and that made them incredibly dangerous. "What about their weaknesses?" asked Major Christina Bell, who commanded the elite Marine unit known as the Death's Head Brigade. "Everything has weaknesses." Dr. Carter smiled for the first time since the briefing began. "Actually, they do have several. First, they are essentially a hive mind. Their individual units have limited intelligence and rely on central coordination. Second, they have never faced serious resistance before. Most species either flee or are consumed too quickly to mount an effective defense." She paused, looking around the room. "And third, they have never encountered a species like us." Hayes knew what she meant. Humanity had evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them. Earth had ice ages, volcanic eruptions, massive storms, and countless predators. Humans had learned to survive by being adaptable, ruthless, and incredibly persistent. They had fought their way to the top of the food chain on a planet where everything else wanted to eat them. "The Zephyrians lived in paradise," Hayes said. "They never learned to be cruel because they never needed to be. But we are different. We know how to fight dirty. We know how to be ruthless. And we know how to win at any cost." Colonel Rodriguez stood up, his face hard. "Sir, my Marines are ready. We've been training for combat in zero-gravity, hostile environments, and confined spaces. We can board their ships and destroy them from the inside." "My pilots are prepared as well," added General Thompson. "We've been developing new tactics specifically for swarm combat. If they want to fight with numbers, we'll show them what human ingenuity can do." But it was Dr. Benjamin Clark who spoke the words that changed everything. Clark was a biochemist who worked in the deepest levels of the facility, in laboratories that officially did not exist. "General," he said quietly, "the Zephyrians have provided us with detailed biological data on the Devourers. With that information, we can develop weapons that will target their specific physiology." Hayes looked at him sharply. "What kind of weapons?" Clark's voice was cold and professional. "Biological weapons. Viruses designed to attack their nervous system. Toxins that will dissolve their organic components. Chemical agents that will disrupt their hive-mind coordination." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what Clark was talking about. He was suggesting that humanity use weapons of mass destruction against the Devourers. Weapons that could potentially wipe out entire fleets or even their entire species. "That's genocide," whispered one of the younger officers. Clark turned to look at him, his eyes hard. "No," he said. "Genocide is what they did to the Zephyrians, what they plan to do to us. We are talking about survival." Hayes stood up, his decision made. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not fighting a conventional war. We are fighting for the survival of our species and every other species in the galaxy. The Devourers have shown no mercy, so we will show them none in return. He looked around the table at his officers. Begin immediate mobilization of all military assets. Retrofit every ship for combat. Prepare every weapon we have, and develop new ones if necessary. The Devourers think they are the apex predators in this galaxy. They are about to learn that they are wrong. As the meeting broke up, Hayes remained behind, staring at the holographic display. The red markers showed the advance of the Devourers, but soon there would be blue markers as well. Blue markers showing the advance of humanity's fleet. The Zephyrians had asked for help, and they were going to get it. But Hayes wondered if they truly understood what they had unleashed. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster watched through the viewport as the Earth Defense Fleet assembled in orbit around Mars. The sight took his breath away. 200 ships of various sizes and classes floated in perfect formation against the red backdrop of the planet. Massive battleships like the Defiance hung in space alongside sleek destroyers and fast attack frigates. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it was preparing to leave the solar system for the first time in history. Ryan commanded the destroyer Retribution, a ship that had been built for patrol duty in the asteroid belt. But over the past month, his vessel had been completely transformed. New weapon systems covered her hull, and her engines had been upgraded for long-range combat. Most importantly, her cargo holds were filled with the biological weapons that Dr. Clark had developed specifically for the Devourers. Admiral Pete Jackson stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, reviewing the final preparations. He was a veteran of the Outer Colony Wars, a man who had earned his rank through skill and courage rather than politics. His weathered face showed the strain of the past weeks, but his eyes burned with determination. He knew that this fleet represented humanity's best chance of survival. Admiral, called his communications officer, "We're receiving final confirmations from all ships. The fleet is ready to depart." Jackson nodded grimly. He had studied every piece of intelligence about the Devourers, and what he had learned had convinced him that this would be unlike any war humanity had ever fought. The enemy was not interested in territory or resources. They wanted to consume everything, and they would never stop until they were destroyed. Chief Engineer Laver Wright worked frantically in the depths of the Defiance, making last-minute adjustments to the ship's weapon systems. She had been working around the clock for weeks, retrofitting every gun and missile launcher for combat against the Devourers. Traditional energy weapons had been modified to disrupt biomechanical systems. Kinetic weapons were loaded with special ammunition designed to cause maximum damage to organic tissue, but it was the biological weapons that made Wright nervous. She had never worked with anything like them before. The virus containers were sealed in special containment units, and the toxin dispensers were programmed to activate only when targeting Devourer ships. If something went wrong, if the weapons leaked or malfunctioned, they could kill everyone aboard. Captain Nicole Torres addressed her crew aboard the cruiser Vengeance. Her ship was one of the newer vessels in the fleet, designed specifically for deep space combat. Her crew was young but well-trained, and they looked at her with the trust that comes from shared danger. "We all know why we're here," Torres said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ship. "The Devourers have destroyed civilizations that were more advanced than us. They have consumed entire worlds and turned them into nothing but dead rock. Now they're coming for us." She paused, looking at the faces of her crew. "But they made one mistake? They hurt innocent people and expected no consequences. They think that because they've never faced real resistance, they never will. They're about to learn that they're wrong." The crew nodded, their faces grim but determined. They knew the odds were against them. The Devourers outnumbered them by thousands to one. But they also knew that humans had faced impossible odds before and survived. Commander Ashley Rivers sat in the cockpit of her fighter, running through final pre-flight checks. The fighter squadrons were humanity's most mobile force, designed to penetrate enemy formations and strike at vulnerable targets. Her ship was loaded with special missiles that contained concentrated doses of the biological weapons. Rivers had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of all. While the main fleet engaged the Devourers in open combat, she would lead her squadron in close-range attacks against enemy command ships. The mission had a low survival rate, but it was necessary. If they could disrupt the Devourer hive mind, the enemy would become vulnerable to conventional attack. Lieutenant Colonel Brad Mills supervised the loading of the biological weapons aboard the assault ship Hammer. His Marines would be responsible for boarding enemy vessels and securing them before they could self-destruct. It was dangerous work, but Mills had trained his men for exactly this kind of mission. The biological weapons were contained in special torpedoes that could be fired directly into enemy ships. Once inside, they would release their payload into the ship's atmosphere. The virus would attack the Devourer's nervous system, while the toxins would dissolve their organic components. It was a weapon of mass destruction, designed to kill everything. It touched. Major Christina Bell stood in the armory of the Hammer, checking her equipment one final time. She commanded the elite Death's Head Brigade, Marines who specialized in the most dangerous combat missions. Her troops were equipped with armor that could protect them from the biological weapons, and their weapons were loaded with ammunition designed to penetrate Devourer hide. Bell had fought in every major conflict of the past decade, but she knew this would be different. The Devourers were not human. They felt no fear, showed no mercy, and would fight to the death. Her Marines would have to be equally ruthless if they wanted to survive. Dr. Benjamin Clark worked in his laboratory aboard the medical ship Mercy, preparing the final batches of biological weapons. He had spent years developing these weapons, and he knew exactly what they would do to the Devourers. The virus would attack their nervous system, causing paralysis and death within minutes. The toxins would dissolve their organic components, turning them into nothing more than chemical sludge. Clark felt no guilt about creating these weapons. The Devourers had shown no mercy to the Zephyrians or any other species they had encountered. They existed only to consume and destroy. In Clark's mind, developing weapons to kill them was not murder. It was pest control. Admiral Jackson received the final reports from his fleet commanders. Every ship was ready, every weapon was loaded, and every crew member knew their mission. The time for preparation was over. It was time to take the fight to the enemy. "Signal all ships," Jackson ordered. "Begin jump sequence." Destination: Kepler 442 system. It's time to show the Devourers what happens when they threaten humanity. The fleet began to move, 200 ships accelerating toward the jump point. Behind them, Earth grew smaller until it was just another star in the darkness. Ahead lay the unknown and an enemy that had never been defeated, but the crews of the Earth Defense Fleet were not afraid. They were angry. The Devourers had made the mistake of hurting innocent people, and now they would face the consequences. They were about to learn that in a galaxy full of prey species, they had finally encountered a predator. And when humans went to war, they did not stop until their enemies were completely destroyed. Captain Derek Stone gripped the command chair of the destroyer, Vengeance, as his ship dropped out of hyperspace into the Kepler 442 system. The sight that greeted him was exactly what the intelligence reports had described, but seeing it with his own eyes still made his stomach turn. The system had once been home to a beautiful blue-green world called the Sara, but now there was nothing left but a gray, lifeless rock. The Devourers had been here for months, systematically consuming everything of value. Their bioships floated in clusters around the dead planet, feeding on the last traces of organic matter. The ships themselves were nightmarish to behold, looking like massive insects crossed with diseased organs. They pulsed with sickly light, and tentacles writhed from their surfaces as they processed their latest meal. "Enemy contacts," reported his sensor operator, Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "I'm reading over 3,000 Devourer vessels in the system. They're spread out in feeding formations around the planet." Stone nodded grimly. The Devourers had not expected resistance. They had grown complacent after years of easy victories, and they were about to pay the price for their overconfidence. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Begin attack pattern Alpha. Target the command vessels first." The Earth Defense Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 200 human ships against 3,000 alien ones. The odds were terrible. But Stone had faith in his people. Humans had always been at their best when facing impossible odds. The Devourers reacted exactly as predicted. Thousands of bioships turned toward the human fleet, their living hulls pulsing with aggressive energy. They moved in swarms with no apparent coordination or tactics. They had never needed strategy before. They had simply overwhelmed their enemies through sheer numbers. Commander Ashley Rivers sat in the cockpit of her fighter, watching the enemy swarm approach. Her squadron was hidden behind the bulk of the battleship Defiance, waiting for the right moment to strike. The fighters were humanity's secret weapon, fast and maneuverable enough to penetrate the Devourer formations. "All fighters, this is Raptor Leader," she spoke into her comm system. "Remember, we're not trying to win a dogfight. We're trying to deliver our payload and get out. Target the large command ships and ignore everything else." The first wave of Devourers crashed into the human battle line like a tide of living death. But the humans were ready for them. The battleship Defiance opened fire with every weapon it had, sending streams of energy and kinetic projectiles into the enemy swarm. The weapons had been specifically modified to disrupt biomechanical systems, and the effect was devastating. Devourer ships began to convulse and die as their organic components were torn apart. But for every ship that fell, 2 more took its place. The swarm kept coming, driven by a hunger that nothing could satisfy. Captain Nicole Torres watched from the bridge of the cruiser Retribution as the battle unfolded around her. Devourer ships were swarming her vessel, their tentacles reaching out to grab and consume, but her crew was ready. They had trained for this moment, and they fought with the desperation of cornered animals. "Fire all weapons," Torres ordered. "Don't let them get close enough to board us." The Retribution's guns blazed continuously, cutting through the alien swarm. But the Devourers kept coming. They felt no pain, showed no fear, and cared nothing for their own losses. They existed only to consume, and they would keep attacking until they were all dead. Lieutenant Colonel Brad Mills watched the battle from the assault ship Hammer, waiting for his moment. His job was to deploy the biological weapons that would turn the tide of the fight. The weapons were loaded into special torpedoes that could penetrate Devourer hulls and release their deadly payload inside. "Target acquired," reported his weapons officer. "Large command ship, bearing 270, range 5,000 kilometers. Mills nodded. "Fire." The torpedo streaked through space, weaving between the battling ships. It struck the Devourer command vessel and penetrated deep into its organic hull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship began to convulse as the biological weapons spread through its systems. The virus attacked the Devourer's nervous system, causing paralysis and death within minutes. The toxins dissolved their organic components, turning living tissue into chemical sludge. The command ship writhed in agony as it died, its crew screaming in frequencies that human ears could not hear. "Commander," Rivers saw her chance and led her fighter squadron through a gap in the enemy formation. The Devourers were focused on the larger human ships and paid little attention to the small fighters. It was exactly the mistake she had been hoping for. "All fighters, follow me in," she ordered. "Target the big ones and make every shot count." The fighters dove into the heart of the Devourer swarm, their weapons blazing. Each fighter carried missiles loaded with concentrated biological weapons. The missiles struck their targets and released their payloads, spreading death through the enemy fleet, but the Devourers began to adapt. Their hive mind processed the new threat and began to focus on the fighters. Suddenly, Rivers found herself surrounded by alien ships, their weapon systems charging to fire. "This is Raptor Leader," she said into her comm. "I'm hit and losing power. Continue the mission without me." Instead of trying to escape, Rivers aimed her crippled fighter directly at the largest Devourer ship in the formation. She had one missile left, and she intended to deliver it personally. Her fighter struck the alien vessel and exploded, taking a chunk of the enemy ship with it. The biological weapon spread through the Devourer command ship, killing everything it touched. Without central coordination, the other ships in the formation began to lose cohesion. They started firing at random, sometimes hitting their own allies. Major Christina Bell led her Marines aboard the boarding pods that were launched from the Hammer. The pods penetrated the hulls of damaged Devourer ships, allowing her troops to fight the enemy hand-to-hand. The Marines wore sealed armor that protected them from the biological weapons, and their weapons were loaded with ammunition designed to penetrate alien hide. The fighting inside the Devourer ships was brutal and desperate. The aliens fought with claws and teeth, showing no mercy and expecting none. But the Marines had been trained for this kind of combat. They moved through the alien ships like ghosts, using tactics learned from centuries of human warfare. Plant the charges and move out, Bell ordered her troops. We don't have much time before this ship starts to dissolve. The Marines worked quickly, placing explosives throughout the ship's vital systems. The biological weapons had weakened the vessel, but it would take conventional explosives to finish it off. As the Marines evacuated, the charges detonated, tearing the ship apart from the inside. The tide of battle began to turn as more Devourer ships succumbed to the biological weapons. The alien swarm started to break apart as command ships died, and coordination collapsed. Individual Devourer vessels began to flee, but the human fleet pursued them relentlessly. Captain Stone watched from the bridge of the Vengeance as the enemy formation disintegrated. The Devourers had never faced an enemy that could match their ruthlessness. They had learned to overwhelm their opponents through numbers and aggression, but they had never learned to adapt when their tactics failed. Signal all ships, Stone ordered. Begin pursuit. Don't let any of them escape to warn the others. A human fleet spread out across the system, hunting down the remaining Devourer ships. It was not enough to win the battle. They had to send a message that would echo. Across the galaxy, the Devourers were not invincible. They could be defeated, and humanity was just getting started. Admiral Jack Williams stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at the massive structure that filled the viewscreen. The Devourer homeworld was not a planet in any traditional sense. It was a living construct the size of a small moon, built from the remains of hundreds of consumed worlds. Its surface writhed with organic growth, and strange lights pulsed through its veins like the heartbeat of some enormous beast. 6 months had passed since the first battle at Kepler 442. The human fleet had grown as other species joined the fight against the Devourers. The Zephyrians had provided ships and technology, while refugee fleets from a dozen worlds had added their vessels to the cause. But everyone knew that the humans were leading this war, and it would be human tactics that decided the outcome. Sensor report, Williams ordered. Never taking his eyes off the alien construct, Lieutenant Corinne Hughes, now serving as his tactical officer, consulted her displays. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the structure's core. It appears to be some kind of central processing facility. The entire Devourer fleet is anchored around it in defensive formations. Williams nodded grimly. Intelligence reports had suggested that the Devourers were controlled by a central organism, a queen that coordinated their entire species through some form of biological communication. If they could kill the queen, the entire Devourer civilization would collapse like a house of cards. Colonel Maria Santos prepared her ground troops aboard the assault ship Hammer. Her mission was the most dangerous of all. While the fleet engaged the Devourer defenses, she would lead a strike team to the surface of the homeworld and fight her way to the Queen's chamber. The odds of survival were almost zero, but someone had to do it. Listen up, Santos addressed her troops, all volunteers who knew they were probably going to die. The surface of that thing is alive. It's going to try to digest us the moment we set foot on it. But we've faced hostile environments before. We know how to adapt and survive. The soldiers nodded, their faces grim but determined. They wore sealed armor that would protect them from the homeworld's digestive acids, and their weapons were loaded with biological ammunition designed to kill devour tissue on contact. They were walking into hell, but they were ready for it, Doctor. Anthony Reed worked frantically in his laboratory aboard the medical ship Mercy, putting the finishing touches on the ultimate biological weapon. This virus was different from the ones they had used before. It was designed specifically to target the Devourer Queen, using genetic markers that the Zephyrians had provided from their own encounters with the creature. "The virus is ready," Reed reported to Williams over the comm system. "But we'll need to deliver it directly to the Queen's chamber. It won't survive long enough to spread through the entire structure." Williams understood. Someone would have to carry the weapon into the heart of the homeworld and release it at point-blank range. It was a suicide mission, but it was their only chance of victory. The battle began as the combined fleet engaged the Devourer defenses. Thousands of bioships swarmed out to meet them, their living hulls pulsing with hostile energy. But the humans had learned from their previous encounters. They no longer tried to fight the Devourers in conventional formations. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, striking at weak points and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. Captain Derek Stone commanded a squadron of destroyers that darted between the larger Devourer ships, firing biological weapons at their most vulnerable points. The aliens tried to swarm his vessels, but the humans were too fast and too smart. They had learned to fight like wolves, using pack tactics to bring down much larger prey. "Target the neural clusters," Stone ordered his weapons officer. "Those are the control centers for each ship? Take them out and the whole thing goes dead." The destroyers unleashed their weapons, sending streams of biotoxins into the Devourer fleet. Ship after ship convulsed and died as their nervous systems were destroyed. But more kept coming, pouring out of the homeworld like antibodies responding to an infection. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster led the first wave of boarding pods toward the homeworld's surface. His job was to establish a beachhead for Santos and her ground troops. The pods pierced the living surface of the construct, and Foster found himself fighting through corridors that writhed and tried to crush him. "The walls are alive," he reported over the comm. "They're trying to digest our equipment. We need to move fast." Foster's troops used flame weapons to clear the corridors, burning away the organic growth that tried to block their path. The homeworld fought back, releasing clouds of toxic gas and sending waves of Devourer warriors to stop the intruders. But the humans kept pushing forward, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the death of every species in the galaxy. Colonel Santos landed, with the second wave leading her strike team deeper into the homeworld's interior. The structure was like a living nightmare, with passages that changed shape and rooms that tried to trap the intruders. But Santos had fought in urban combat before, and she knew how to adapt to a changing battlefield. "The Queen's chamber is 3 kilometers down," she reported. "We're going to have to fight for every meter." The strike team moved through the homeworld like a spear thrust into the heart of an enemy. They used explosives to blast through walls, flame weapons to clear passages, and biological ammunition to kill everything that tried to stop them. The homeworld screamed around them, a sound that no human ear should have been able to hear. Above them, the space battle raged on. Admiral Williams watched as his fleet slowly pushed through the Devourer defenses. The aliens were fighting with desperate fury, throwing everything they had at the human ships, but the biological weapons were taking their toll. Devourer ships were dying faster than they could be replaced. "Admiral," reported Hughes, "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from the homeworld's core." "Something's happening down there." Williams knew what it meant. Santos and her team were getting close to the Queen. The entire structure was responding to the threat, marshaling its defenses to protect the most important organism in the Devourer. Hierarchy. Santos reached the Queen's chamber after hours of brutal fighting. The room was enormous, its walls pulsing with organic light. At the center sat the Queen herself, a creature the size of a building. She was beautiful in a terrible way, her form combining aspects of insect, plant, and machine. Hundreds of neural cables connected her to the homeworld's control systems, and her massive eyes tracked the intruders with ancient intelligence. "Release the weapon," Santos ordered Dr. Reed, who had accompanied the strike team despite the danger. Reed activated the virus container and threw it toward the Queen. The creature tried to defend herself, sending waves of Devourer warriors to stop the weapon, but it was too late. The virus spread through the chamber, attacking the Queen's nervous system with ruthless efficiency. The Queen's death was not silent. As the massive organism convulsed and died, she released a psychic scream that echoed across the galaxy. Every devourer in the universe felt her passing, and without her coordination, their hive mind began to collapse. In space, the devourer fleet suddenly stopped fighting. Ships that had been attacking moments before now drifted aimlessly, their crews dead or dying as the biological network that connected them failed. The homeworld itself began to break apart, its organic components dissolving without the Queen's control. Admiral Williams watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the Devourer civilization died around him. It had taken months of fighting and thousands of casualties, but humanity had done the impossible. They had defeated an enemy that had consumed entire star systems. "Signal all ships," Williams ordered. "Begin rescue operations. Get our people off that thing before it completely falls apart." As the rescue operations continued, reports came in from across the galaxy. Devourer fleets were shutting down everywhere, their ships going dark as the hive mind collapsed. The nightmare was finally over. Captain Roger Thompson, now promoted to admiral, stood on the bridge of the cruiser Victory and watched as cleanup crews worked to purge the last traces of Devourer contamination from the galaxy. The war was won, but its lessons would echo through the stars for generations to come. The Zephyrians had begged for help, and humanity had answered. But in saving the galaxy, humans had revealed themselves to be more terrifying than the enemy they had defeated. They were not cruel by choice, but they were capable of incredible ruthlessness when threatened. The galaxy had learned that among all the prey species of the universe, there was one that refused to be hunted. And when these Deathworlders went to war, they did not stop until their enemies were completely destroyed.